the rate of learning is important for the future of society and, for the way in which you run your business, the way in which you educate yourself, your family. If global commerce didn't exist and it would start existing today, and someone were to say, how do I build a payments network for companies in all these jurisdictions all over the world? And you have the infrastructure that exists today, like it would need to be on a stablecoin. No one would invent correspondent banking. I think we are most of the time the limiting factor in achieving our dreams. And I get really excited about that stuff.
Daniel, welcome to Fintech Leaders. I'm really happy to be recording this with you, especially because I've been an admirer of you, of Bitso, for a very long number of years, very high number of years. And so it's about time to hear your story here on the show. So welcome. How are you doing today?
Miguel, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be chatting with you. I think we've had the chance to speak in the past a few times, and your words definitely mean a great deal to me, and excited to be here. Doing very well. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. So I'll start with the first thing. So I actually briefly chatted with Nigel Morris from QED in preparation for this interview. I know he's a big fan of you. I believe he sits on your board. He's one of your investors. Also past guest of the show. And he suggested that we start talking about the epiphany you had early on that led you to crypto, right? So tell us about this revelation, and then we'll start talking about many other themes.
Yeah, so I guess look, I was living in San Francisco at the time. I just graduated from college where I'd studied economics and computer science. And a friend of mine one night just asked me, have you heard about this thing called Bitcoin? And I'd never heard of Bitcoin before. And this is a while ago. This is around 2010 or so. And I went back home and I just Googled Bitcoin. And my intent was to leave the browser open, leave a tab open with that and go to sleep. It must have been 2 a.m. in the morning. I clicked on the first link and there was this description that said something to the extent, it's an old Bitcoin wiki. And it said something like, Bitcoin is an economic experiment to build a peer-to-peer decentralized currency outside of the realm of any government control or something like that. And I was just like, what? What is an economic experiment? What would it mean to create some sort of a currency outside of until that point, I was aware of Mexican pesos and US dollars and euros and whatever. But even though there's a lot of examples of these private currencies that have existed and continue to exist today, I'd never kind of learned about them. And so I was like, oh, what does it mean for a currency to exist outside of the context of a government? Why? And it was just kind of a fascinating rabbit hole that I've been in the last almost 15 years now, I guess, where it's just been kind of a little bit of an experiment of what could be different. My favorite books growing up were always Brave New World and Fahrenheit 451 and 1984, where the kind of the premise is always the hero of the story at some point kind of realizes that the world was not as it was painted to them. There was some other reality that had to be uncovered that was behind the original kind of facade or the apparent facade. And for me, falling into this rabbit hole has been a little bit like that. It's how does money get created? Who gets to create it? Who gets to control how much of it gets created? Which governments have had sound monetary policies that have been to the benefits of their citizens? And which governments have had monetary policies that have been to the detriment of their citizens? And now you have this digital age and the world is very global and I consume global products and services. Why is my money so local? Is there an opportunity for money to be digital? Is there an opportunity for money to be global? I just said I studied economics and I had drawn 1,000 graphs where you put price and quantity and you do these little graphs for supply and demand. And I'd never actually really stopped and asked what is actually behind the dollar. Okay, that there's a central bank, but what is really behind that? What is the cost of printing a dollar versus the value of that dollar? And who gets to capture that value? And there were all these kind of interesting questions. And it just led me down this wonderful path of just trying to understand what is really money and what is the future. And can we have a different form of money? And can these new technology constructs through the use of blockchain enable kind of like new products and experiences. And obviously the crypto industry has evolved massively since that kind of like very early Bitcoin wiki, where it was really, I think, like the very, very, very early stages. And so there's now all these other things that have created, and now the industry is more interesting and more fascinating in many other ways than just kind of like Bitcoin. But Bitcoin still holds a very special place for me. And, a lot of people have seen the appreciation of Bitcoin over the past 15 years. 15 years ago, it was a sub-dollar. Right now, I'm not sure what's happening with the market, but it's ranging anywhere between $75,000 and $90,000. It's a tremendous amount of appreciation over the last 15 years. It's been one of the most highest return investments over the last 15 years. And I still feel like the basic premise is we've invented a new form of store of value. It's still not great as a unit of account. It's still not great as a method of payment. So it doesn't kind of fulfill the three definitions of money, which are store of value, unit of account, and a method of payment. But it seems to be doing one fairly well. And I still believe that there's good chances that over time, Bitcoin will continue to sweep into these other two in a more meaningful way than it has for the last 15 years. But money is something that has existed for millenniums, and Bitcoin is 16 years old at most. And so I still think that there's a long way for it to go. But again, I guess the whole crypto industry. But to your question, it was just the opportunity to kind of spend time looking at something very novel, very new, and just kind of explore this in such an exciting way, I would say. And it continues to be that, because I feel like crypto still has a very, very long way to go. And I think it's going to be fascinating what the next 15 years look like.
You were talking about Bitcoin. Are you familiar, and it's okay if you don't have an opinion, but are you familiar with the theory that Jack Dorsey is Satoshi?
Well, I've heard a lot of stuff that Jack Dorsey said over the past, so I'm not sure exactly which one you are referring to.
I don't have the name of the researcher who put this out 2 months ago, but I'm convinced, because they have some pretty conclusive evidence putting together Jack's Twitter timeline plus Satoshi's timeline around 08, 09, 2010. And I mean, the evidence is pretty strong. Of course, there's no definitive answer, but I mean, I just think that's fascinating that there's high odds that Jack Dorsey is the brains behind Satoshi. Maybe not the only one, but it definitely appears that way. I'll send you this immediately after our call, and I'll post it in the links in the show notes.
Oh, I have not heard the Jack Dorsey version of it. I've heard, I think if you're in the industry, at some point or another, you've tried to kind of also go down the who is Satoshi rabbit hole. And there's a lot of people who have claimed to have been Satoshi. I think what's fascinating is that the way in which Bitcoin is, kind of comes into existence. You have this individual posted in a forum, people read about it. A lot of people think this is kind of stupid. He goes out and builds the first version of it. Some more people get on board. And eventually, it starts kind of catching up. And then the guy says okay, I'm leaving this project that just kind of vanishes into thin air. And it's been years of people trying to put together who this person might be. And there's been people who have raised their hands and said, it's me. It turns out there's very easy ways to prove that you are Satoshi Nakamoto. There's these private keys that, unless they got burned as part of this immaculate conception of Bitcoin, someone should have them, and they should be able to sign messages to just, be able to prove that they're Satoshi Nakamoto. And so far, people who have claimed to have been that have never been able to actually sign any messages to say, okay, I am actually the holder of Satoshi keys, and so I can do that very easily. But I think it doesn't matter anymore. It really doesn't matter if it's Jack Dorsey or if it's Hal Finney or if it was, for a very long time, when I read this book called The PayPal Mafia or The PayPal Wars, I forget. And when you read this book and you read some of those early days of Peter Thiel and Mac Levin talking about what they wanted to do with PayPal and this kind of global forms of money, etc. It was almost like someone was describing Bitcoin, right? And that book is before I believe that book is published before Bitcoin was invented. And for the longest time, I was like, oh, Matt Levin must have been the inventor of this thing. Because he had the technical skills, the motivation, had been thinking about this problem space for a really long time. A lot of people feel like it's Hal Finney, who's, no longer with us. But I don't think it really matters. But it's kind of like fun that there's still these almost scavenger hunt to try and find the creator of Bitcoin.
Yeah, I'll send you the link after this, but it's two guys, Matthew Siegel and Sean Murray on Twitter. But take a look and you let me know your thoughts after that. Moving on, Daniel, one thing that I understand is important for you as a founder, as a company leader, but also for the rest of the company, is the rate of learning. Sounds like this is one of your core principles. Maybe tell us, first of all, why is that important, and how can we get better in our rate of learning?
Yeah. So I went to school to Stanford, and Stanford has this quarter system. And that means that you have to cover in a quarter what most schools would cover in a semester. And it just means the pace of learning, the rate of learning is very high. And I've always thought that the biggest gift that Stanford gave me was the ability to learn. Because it just had to be so quick. You had to learn whether it was signal processing or whether it was, differential calculus, whatever it was, you had to pack it in 10 weeks, right? Which is like the I think it's 10 or maybe it's 12 weeks. But anyways, very short amount of time, right? And when working in an industry like crypto, where everything's getting reinvented, new things, new paradigms, new projects, new challenges, new regulatory headwinds or tailwinds, the industry is very dynamic. It's changing all the time, right? And the ability to really understand these concepts quickly, deeply, and understand how you can apply them into the business becomes very, very relevant and important. The best people, I think, at Bitso are those who are able to learn these things very quickly, or just learn very quickly, and then understand how you can apply that to your day-to-day, right? Because we see stuff that happens all the time, whether it's cyber criminals that we've gotten attacked by nation states as a crypto exchange is very common. And so how do you develop the tooling to detect this, to respond to it, to protect your customers from it? And how do you do that, not once, but just all the time? Because it's, these folks are just continuously attacking you. Or, what is happening on the regulatory front? How do I respond to concerns around, what the technology can enable? Or and how do you how can you create the narratives and actually the products and build out the company in a way that you're actually creating things that are beneficial for society? And so for me, the rate at which you're able to learn is an indication of how fast can you adjust. And I don't think we've ever lived at a moment in time when things are changing so rapidly in all dimensions, right? Whether it's what the president of the United States is putting on social media and reacting to kind of public policy, the rate at which things are changing it's just accelerating, right? We see this in the crypto space, but the world is accelerating. The fact that we're so interconnected, the fact that there's so much media that is, it's being produced, so much content, and that you can consume content in so many forms. I mean, you just need to stand at an airport and see, people grab their phones and they're just scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. And it's the amount of signal that, or maybe noise that there is just higher. It's exponentially higher than it was when I was in college, 20 years ago. And we had Facebook then, but people would check Facebook in the evenings because no one had a smartphone, right? Now you get basically the stimulus is just ongoing. It's there. And you can spend a lot of time with just noise. And how do you pick that out? And so it's very important to me. The rate of learning is very important to me because it's what allows us to, I think, find that signal in that noise and then apply it. And I believe that it's a skill that people just must develop. in the world as it exists today. Whether it is to understand, how do you apply this in your business, or how do you respond to the challenges in the lives of your kids who are now like living under a very, very different type of environment that I was born, that I grew up in. And so the tips that I have for people is like, be able to kind of like, I love reading, but it's impossible to read all the content that there is. And so you need to learn how to like read in a way that you can pick up the things that really matter. I think being an independent thinker becomes very important because, especially like as you're consuming things on social media, the narratives are so polarizing these days. And like, I tend to believe that no one can be consistently right ever. And so you need to learn how to build your own opinion on things. There's this line, I believe it's from The Usual Suspects. It says something like, listen to everyone, but pay attention to no one. And it's a little bit like that. Like the world has turned a little bit like that. Like you just need to be able to sift through all these narratives and then build your own conviction. And a great way to do that is to surround yourself with very smart people and have those conversations with those people and also listen to them, but also build your own opinion around them. One of the sad things about the way that the world has turned out, I think it's going back to a place where this will be enabled. But one of the things that I found very hard is there was a moment of time where it was very difficult to have conversations around specific subjects, even if you just wanted to explore them because you just weren't well versed to them. But you weren't well versed in like women's rights, and that turned you into an evil person. And it was like, well, I just been very deep into this crypto stuff, and so I haven't had the time to really study and understand really what are these issues. And so I want to learn and engage, but at times it was very difficult to engage in certain subjects because the world had kind of like shut down that narrative. And I think that's like a very special things that universities need to be able to maintain, like the ability to have discourse. But I think even society, like the best ideas will come by having discourse and debating them and forming our opinions and then maybe challenging the status quo and like pushing for progress. But without discourse, it's impossible to basically be able to form your own opinions. You need to be able to go into the arena and say something and be debated and learn that maybe you were wrong. But if you're going to burn and you're going to be censored and you're going to be canceled, it reduces the incentive that someone has to put themselves out there. Another quote that I really love is by Stephen Hawking, and he says something to the extent of like, for millions of years, men were just like the animals, but then something happened which sparked the power of our imagination, which is that we learned to talk. And all we need to do is make sure that we keep on talking. And he says that using his very famous, robotic voice, which is like it makes it even more powerful because you have this individual who lost the power to talk, found it through this machine, and is telling us all we need to do is make sure that we keep on talking. And I feel really strongly about that because it's the only way that we have, or maybe not the only way, but one of the best ways that we have to just keep on learning. And so if I go back to the premise that learning is important and the rate of learning is important for the future of society and for the way in which you run your business, the way in which you educate yourself, your families, etc., then without that ability to engage, to talk, to have conversations, you basically don't have anything.
When you're bringing someone on board new to the company, how do you measure this? Have you developed any techniques or methods?
Yeah, so one of the values that we have at Bitso is particularly that we like folks to challenge the status quo. And that might even be the ideas or constructs that management has. And so we try to make that be part of the onboarding of our team. Actually, right after this, we have a company meeting and we're going to be talking about like values. And we're going to be talking specifically about this concept of really challenging status quo. And we've had individuals at the company who have done this. And many times when they've done that, I had an engineer that came to me a couple of years ago at an event, and he's like, I don't understand why we're not doing X at Bitso. And I was like, okay, well, I'm not a huge believer in X, but tell me why you think why do you think this is important? Anyways, long story short, this guy brought to me some data that I'd never seen in my life that made his argument very compelling. We went down and did that. It's from a product perspective. We launched this variation of the product that did that, and we immediately saw like this tremendous uptick. And so then we've celebrated that. And, we talk about that. We talk about people who come in and not only present ideas that challenge existing wisdom, but then the reaction of management when we see that and, our ability to kind of like learn quickly from that and then try something out and then see if it works and then celebrating those, those occurrences to try and build a culture of that, The way that I like to do with my own report so that they do it with the reports is like just showing people like these new things that are happening, whether it's a new way to think about a problem, whether it's a new product category, whether it's a new public policy change, and just see how quickly they're able to digest what is happening, and to be part of the feedback conversation. I was having a feedback conversation with someone recently, and I was telling this person, like, look, I wish you'd moved quicker here. And this person was telling me like, well, I just didn't appreciate how important this specific part of the business was. And now I have and so I was focused on like something else. And now I kind of like appreciate more. And so then we had a conversation around like, what prevented you from understanding that this is what was important, that this was where you had to focus. Because in my mind, everything was out there. And so then we had a very helpful conversation around like, what prevented this individual. And it was mostly differences in styles, in like how I sometimes communicate and how this person is used to communicate. We set some goals at the beginning of the quarter, and this person was kind of like marching very steadily towards those goals. The world is very dynamic. The world is not static. And so the world had shifted and this thing had become a priority. And I thought I'd, made it very clear that it was a priority, but I never sat around him and realigned his goals. I never sat with him and said, hey, we have this goal. We're going to like cancel it. We're going to put this new thing, which is just not how I think. But this person comes from a more traditional background and was just more used to like being very aligned with goals until my manager tells me that the goal has shifted. And that was a learning experience for me in my relationship with this individual. But it was also a learning experience for him, right? Because if he's hearing what I told him is like, look, if you're hearing me talk about X, Y, and Z, which you don't think is aligned with your goals, and that's making you short circuit, just bring it to our one-on-one and tell me, hey, you're telling the company, you're telling others that this is important. So the methodology, I would say, is just keeping those conversations open and intact and like just exploring whether the individual is able to get that kind of like rate of learning to a point where it matches what you or the company needs.
Daniel, to help put things into perspective, give us a little bit of a sense of the scale of Bitso. Maybe share some numbers, some figures, just for the audience to get a sense of the breadth of the company.
Sure. So Bitso operates in multiple jurisdictions. So we serve the Mexico, Argentina, Colombia, Brazil as main markets, and then we serve a number of sort of secondary markets. The company has about 550 employees. We serve over 12 million customers across the region. These are like a lot of like crypto investors and folks that are trying to do stuff with crypto, like freelancers who now earn money in crypto, people who want to get access to digital dollars in some of these jurisdictions. And then we also have a fairly large B2B product that we call Bitso Business. And Bitso Business serves thousands of customers. These are larger companies that mainly move money across borders, and they mostly do that using stablecoins. We process over 10% of the remittances that flow from the US to Mexico. So the US to Mexico remittance corridor is the largest remittance corridor in the world. It flows about $60 to $70 billion of yearly transactions, and we do about 10% of that and growing. Yeah, those are some numbers I'd share, unless you're looking for another one.
No, I'm actually curious, as the leader of the company and founder, what are maybe the metric that you track the closest, or maybe a group of metrics they are extremely important for you?
Yeah, so look, it's interesting because it always changes, right? The metric that has never changed is I'm always tracking revenue, right? Like what is our revenue doing? How is it moving? We have a challenge in our retail business, which is that it's fairly volatile. And so the amount of revenue that brings in is very correlated to crypto prices. And so just getting a sense of where the revenue is at, what the revenue is doing is important for me. And it's important for me because we have appetite to invest in stuff, but we want to make sure that we're not investing way ahead of our revenues. The company was profitable in 2024. And we're trying to basically, we want to continue to invest, we want to continue to grow, but we also want to make sure that we do that in a very conscious way, given the volatility that we have in our business. So I'm always tracking revenue. But then there's always core initiatives that are important, that we're driving, and that I am tracking, right? And so, for example, on the Bitso business side, I'm tracking volumes. Volumes really matter to me. I'm tracking the liquidity of our markets because I've seen that when our markets are not very liquid, we tend to lose some of the volume on the Bitso business side. The pricing, like a lot of these large customers are very, very sensitive to pricing. And pricing is not necessarily how much I charge you, but what's the liquidity that's available? What is the price at which I can sell or buy dollars of these larger amounts? And so I'm tracking liquidity very, very closely. Last year, we had a very big initiative for operational excellence. We wanted to basically, as our business has grown on the B2B side, uptime, resilience, etc., became very important. And also for a retail business, it's always been very important, but it's very different serving retail and serving institutions. And so we came up with something called the Bitso Operational Excellence Score. It's basically a bunch of metrics that roll up into this one index. And it tracks number of incidents, the time it takes us to recover from an incident. It tracks security vulnerabilities, how long it took us to fix those security vulnerabilities. It tracks the amount of uptime. It tracks a large number of dimensions, errors, alert, etc., and it boils into this index. And we had a very, very, very aggressive set of objectives for 2024. And so I was tracking that thing almost daily. We had these dashboards, and I was tracking them almost daily just to see how it was moving. And so I tend to track religiously the things that really matter for that at that point in the company. So we're looking at things like churn right now, and so I'm starting to look very closely at churn. And then there's the set of metrics that, okay, let me take a step back. We tend to have 3 objectives as a company, right? And so this year we have an objective around growth. So that's mostly measured around revenue growth, but there's an objective around growth. There's an objective around operational excellence. And so we want to keep moving that metric that I just described up. And then last year, for example, we had a metric around employee net promoter score. And so how do we keep this company an amazing place where people can do their best work? Are we enabling people to do their best work at Bitso? And so those are the 3 metrics that I was tracking religiously all through last year. And then we have and we've done that for the last, I believe, 4 years or so, where we've come up with 3 metrics that we kind of track. Not only do I track those, but we track them with the company. We meet as a company every 2 weeks, and we give an update on where are we on each of those, what are the initiatives that are driving them, what's been, whether we're hitting that or we're falling short, and what are we doing in either direction. And so for us, it starts with a planning process where we set out these metrics. What are the 3 things that we want to achieve as a company? How are we going to track them? And then basically just creating dashboards. We use Slack, and we get these dashboards basically delivered to us on a weekly basis. And so there's a lot of visibility, not only on the exec team and myself, but towards the rest of the company.
Sounds like you're a big fan of transparency and making sure that the entire company has access and understanding of where is your mind at, where is the company moving towards. Are there limits for how transparent you can be, or do you believe in radical transparency as Ray Dalio does?
Yeah, so we've definitely over the years have become a much more transparent company. We used to not be as transparent. We used to not talk much about numbers with the team for no good reason. The way that we built the product was always very transparent on a volume perspective. We share our volumes with anyone in the world that wants to see them, and we've always done that since day one. And so there was always some level of transparency onto the traction of the platform. But we never used to share internally for the first few years, we never shared like revenue, costs. I guess we were like just product building. And so that was kind of like the most important thing. That was how we were kind of like measuring our success. But then we kind of like realized that people had no idea what was going on. They had no idea whether the business was profitable, whether it was not profitable. They just had no concept of how the company was doing. And we had these wild years where like a ton of money was made. And so everybody knew that because we gave out big bonuses. But then we had these years where it was like crypto winter and there was no money to pay out those bonuses. And people were like, hey, why did I get such a large bonus last year and I'm not getting anything this year? And so I was like, oh my God, we need to like actually be like, we need to show the team what's actually happening. And then actually today, one of our values is transparency and integrity. And we've become super transparent. Like now there's all these dashboards when it comes to like results of the company. So there's all these dashboards that anyone in the company gets, like everyone, they get sent out to public channels on Slack. And, there's the one that I talked about with the overall objectives. But for every initiative almost at Bitso, there's a dashboard that gets created that gets then delivered to the team. And so even if you're working on like the withdrawals, the connection to the interbank payment system in Mexico, and that's your project at Bitso, which is a very important project, but you get numbers and people can see those numbers. How well are you doing? What's your uptime? How fast did you correct any cybersecurity issues that were detected, et cetera, et cetera? And we make those fairly public. And so people can see like, what's the Bitso operational score of the company, but then they can drill down and look at it on an almost like team basis. It doesn't go to a person basis because it gets measured on a team perspective, but it goes all the way down there. And I think it has really enabled the right behaviors at Bitso. It's not a finger pointing thing. It's more of a like, what's happening and why is this team unable to keep that metric up? What is it that they're doing too much? Sometimes it's like their managers want to go for a lot of new product development while existing product is not very well maintained. And so that gives us a ton of visibility and it enables much higher quality discussions and conversations because people can point out and say, I would love to do this new product, but my Bitso Operational Excellence score, which we call BOES, my BOES score is very low. And so it enables a conversation, right, with data, and it allows people to have like a common level of understanding or a common ground to have these conversations, as opposed to like, oh, I'm worried about tech debt. Okay, that's a good thing to say, but how worried are you? Like, is this a massive problem or is this just a little problem? And by tying it to specific metrics, you can actually see, okay, no, we need to be really worried about tech debt here. Or no, we don't need to be that worried about tech debt here. But when you start seeing like this piece of software is failing and it's impacting customers and it's been doing this and that, it makes the conversation a lot easier. Now, we don't go the radical transparency Ray Dalio way of like every meeting is rated and every conversation is recorded and everyone has access to all of that information. Like we don't go all that way. I think when it comes to performance management, I think we tend to be more of the praise in public and then have the conversations in private around, areas of opportunity, etc. But then when we let go of people, we've definitely started to be going down the route of more transparency. We used to, just send out an announcement and say, hey, communicating with you that X, Y, and Z has left the company, and kind of like that was that. And it left a lot of people like very confused as to was this person terminated? Was this person, did this person quit? Like what actually really happened here? And we've started to go a lot more transparent on that front. And it has actually worked really, really well because it gives you an opportunity to, again, it gives you an opportunity to teach people what are the behaviors that you reward and what are the behaviors that you don't like. And it gives people an opportunity to learn from that. It gives people an opportunity to say, okay, yeah, I can see that. I can see how those person's behavior weren't the right ones. Whether it's because this person was like doing stuff where they crossed a line that they shouldn't have crossed, and what was that line? So we had a sad case of internal fraud recently that we were able to detect, and we were fairly transparent with the company around what it was, what are we doing about it, and what did we learn, and how are we going to prevent this from happening in the future. And the amount of people that reached out and said, like, thank you for being so transparent. Like, I had noticed that behavior and I wasn't sure if I should say anything. And now I realized that I was, that I should have said something. I should have been proactive. I should have be like, I just wasn't entirely sure. How I should have responded. And now you've made it very clear. The next time I see anything remotely similar to that, I'm going to make sure that I raise my hand. And so it gives you as a leader the opportunity to like teach your company what are the things that you reward and what are the things that you punish, if that's the way to put it. And it gives your company an opportunity to learn from that.
So before we run out of time, Daniel, I want to ask you about two things. Number one, we got to spend a couple of minutes talking about stable coins because I know that Bitso is doubling down on the space. I believe you're even starting an ecosystem around it, maybe a conference. The main question is why?
Yeah, so this is a great question. So look, stable coins give you the opportunity to do everything that fiat allows you to do. It's a great unit of account in most places. It's a great method of payment, right? I'm not going to comment on the store of value side of things, but for most people, it's an acceptable store of value. I think it's a terrible store of value, but that's a different conversation. But like the reality is like, people are used to spending dollars, pesos, whatever. That's what their local, that's what your restaurant, your supermarket, whatever, your rent is denominated in like a local fiat currency. So people are like very used to this concept. But as I was mentioning, like the world is digital. There's no more digital deniers. The world is global. And now you get the ability to do everything that like Bitcoin allowed you to do 10 years ago, i.e. operate it globally, send it to anyone, operates 24/7, et cetera, but it allows you to do that with a representation of a value that you are very, very well accustomed to, right? And so what we're seeing develop is that, before that, dollars had already been digitized before, right? In fact, the vast majority of dollars in existence just exist in a digital form. They actually are not printed dollars, but 94+% of the dollars that exist today just exist on a digital ledger, whether that's on your bank, whether it's, somewhere else, but they just exist in a digital form. Most of the dollars that, most people hold are not physical. You have them at a bank account somewhere. That's where your savings are. And so what stablecoins allow you to do is just basically create the same dollars that you've already had digitally in your bank account, but now they're kind of like interoperable and they're global. And that means that, if you have them at Coinbase, you can send them to me at Bitso. And Coinbase and I don't really need to have a commercial relationship. We just both need to kind of like be plugged into this network. It's sort of like email, right? Like the email that, someone at Coinbase has, the email infrastructure provider might not necessarily be the same one that I have at Bitso, but our systems can communicate with each other because they speak a common protocol. And that's true anywhere. As long as anyone spoke SMTP, which is a protocol for sending mail, then you could communicate with them. If someone didn't have email, then you couldn't communicate with them. But what ended up happening was most people onboarded some sort of an email system, and now people can communicate with each other. And I believe that's what's going to end up happening with stablecoins. There are some interesting challenges around like AML, KYC. There's like interesting challenges that abound. But what we're seeing are like companies in the US are hiring freelancers in LATAM, and they're like, I'm going to pay you with a stable coin because it's easier to send and it's going to be faster, and and you're going to be able to receive it either at Bitso or anywhere else that you want. Like people are just replacing wires with stablecoin transfers. A stablecoin transfer can cost you, in some networks, a couple of cents and arrives instantly. And in some, if you send a wire transfer, that may cost you $20-$40 and it may take 2 to 3 days to arrive, right? And sometimes it's converted to your local currency and you don't know at what exchange rate, and it has all these other issues. And I was talking about like some of our numbers around remittances. When we started to play in the remittance space, like we were doing all of that through cryptos, so like Bitcoin or XRP or Ethereum. And now it's all stable coins, right? Because the sales process is a lot easier. You used to say, hey, go in and buy Bitcoin and then send it and then sell it. And you're going to hold Bitcoin for a very short amount of time. But people are afraid of like, well, what happens if the value changes in that amount of time, right? In that fraction of a second or a few seconds that I have it. Now it's like, I'll just hold digital dollars and I'll send them and then I'll transfer them to pesos. So it's kind of like, it's made everything easier. And we've seen a tremendous amount of innovation on the space. Probably the most interesting thing that happened in 2024 was a company named Bridge that we're big partners of and that we like quite a lot, got acquired by Stripe for $1 billion, right? And so we're seeing a bunch of companies that are trying to do something similar. And so we've doubled down at Bitso on this in various number of forms. One, we are continuing to improve our infrastructure to support USD stablecoins. And so that means more networks, more currencies, et cetera, et cetera. We have launched our own MXN stablecoin, MXNB, and with a consortium of folks, we launched BRL stablecoin called BRL1. And we're hoping that, we can build liquidity for these assets on chain and that the future of kind of like FX and cross-border transactions will happen with this construct. The way that I kind of think about it is like if global commerce didn't exist and it would start existing today and someone were to say, how do I build a payments network for companies in all these jurisdictions all over the world? And you have the infrastructure that exists today, like it would need to be on a stablecoin. No one would invent correspondent banking and no one would invent the messaging layer of Swift. It would just be on stablecoins. And so our bet is that stablecoins will just eat all of cross-border transactions in the FX markets. And then the last two things that we're doing is we created an accelerator. And so we've created an accelerator to accelerate as many companies in LATAM as possible. They don't even need to be in LATAM. They just need to be wanting to do something like with stablecoins. And so I think we created the first stablecoin accelerator, maybe even in the world. And, it was incredible. We got hundreds of applications and we're going to be announcing the first cohort for the push, and that's exciting for us. The push is what this initiative is called. And then we're also doing a stablecoin conference in August. And this is all just a way to bring policymakers, builders, customers, enthusiasts together to try and continue to push forward the narrative of stablecoins. Not only the narrative, but like actually the progress of stablecoins in the world. And we're extremely, extremely excited about this. And again, we just feel like this is the way in which the financial system is going to evolve and we want to be the center of it.
Daniel, final question. So I got feedback from a number of people that, of course, you are hyper committed to Bitso. That's clearly 100% of your time. But you also like to go on this personal side quest where I think you restored a family car, you pursued your German heritage in great detail, and you also got your, I think, pilot's license. So you learn how to fly. Sounds like you always have some personal projects going on, and maybe you can tell us about one of those stories.
Sure. So I'm fully obsessed with Bitso, but it's always really, really fun. I love learning. I mean, we've talked about learning quite a lot. And so I just feel like I am pushing myself. And so with the car, we had this car that we couldn't turn on. And so it was a lot of fun just disassembling. And it turns out like old cars are actually like really easy to understand. I didn't know that. So it was kind of like this very imposing, very scary thing, right? Like where do you even get started? And, taking off some of the panels away and finding the cables. But you actually like, you try to do that on a Tesla and it's impossible. Those things are like engineering feats and not even you don't have to go all the way to a Tesla. Like, I was whatever, like modern cars are just a lot more complex, but these older cars are like remarkably simple. And so just a lot of fun to like, to try to do this. And it was an opportunity to also spend some time with my kids. My kids are young, but they're very enthusiastic about like, mechanics and how stuff works. And it was kind of fun for me to figure that out with them. And one of the things that's like fascinating is, the rise of like AI, the amount of things that you can just short circuit to learn something faster, do something quicker, right? Like you take a picture of something and say, what is this? And this is a hydroback. What the hell is a hydroback? Oh, well, this is a thing that allows you to like, the brakes and blah, blah, blah. Oh, okay. And then it's kind of fun because it's an opportunity to spend time with the family. It's an opportunity to learn, and it's like a challenge. It's a challenge just finding the parts and figuring out like where do I source like an O-ring of this size. And I don't know. It just keeps me with something on the side that is exciting and where you can hopefully share it with people and where you can learn. And then it just, I've always enjoyed that stuff. Like I've always done weird things in my life since I was very, very young. And I try to continue to do at least like one weird thing a year that is just kind of like a little bit unconventional. And, I learned to fly. And one of the things that I would love to do at some point is to do like the Atlantic crossing. And, I fly these little small airplanes, single engine. They don't have enormous range. And so I'm very early on that journey, but it's just kind of fun to like read, how do you do the crossing? Like, what are the routes? What are the challenges? What are the dangers? What are the things that like how do you prepare for a crossing like this? And so a lot of people like do these, but they hire like a professional and they kind of like offload a lot of the thinking to them. I like to do these things my own. It's kind of like fascinating, interesting, keeps me alive, gets me, I don't know. I think it just keeps me thinking. And I find these things really, really fun. And so I'm trying to do this Atlantic crossing, in about 5 years, once my kids are a little older. But I'm starting to, I'm just looking at a book that I have that a guy describes in a fair amount, in a lot of detail, how he's done it. And I haven't finished the book, but I've kind of like skimmed it. And so it's just an opportunity, I guess, to, you get such a short amount of time in this world, relatively speaking. And I just want to do the most out of it. And finding these things, I feel like most people have dreams and they don't go after them just because they don't have the drive to go after them. Like every single person that I've met that is driven has figured out how to make their dreams a reality. And I think I've been very lucky to have had the ability to learn from great people, be around great people, and it really motivates me to try and learn something new and go after that. And I think we are most of the time the limiting factor in achieving our dreams. And so yeah, I get really excited about that stuff.
I think you have a curious mind and you're always looking for projects to feed it, which is fascinating. Thanks for sharing that, Daniel. And thanks for spending this hour on the show with me. Really, really interesting stuff. I think it's been one of my favorite episodes. Thank you so much. And I'm excited for the next decade of Bitso.
Thank you, Miguel. Likewise, and thank you for having me here. Always a pleasure chatting, and looking forward to seeing you soon.
The Fintech Leaders Podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered financial or investment advice.